Welcome to Shatter.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. It happened on a Tuesday night. We were sitting in the living room, the TV on, but neither of us watching. She was scrolling on her iPhone, legs tucked under a blanket, acting like I wasn't even there. I had spent the whole day fixing things around the house, changing the air filter, mowing the lawn, cooking dinner because she got home late from work. When I sat beside her, I reached out, just wanting to hold her hand. She didn't even look up. Then she said it. Calm. Cold. You can't expect me to be intimate on demand. The words didn't sound angry, just final. Like she'd rehearsed them. My hand froze midair. I looked at her, waiting for a sign that she didn't mean it. But she kept scrolling, sipping her Starbucks cup like she was discussing the weather. That was the moment something in me quietly broke. I didn't argue. I didn't ask for an explanation. I just nodded slowly and stood up. I could see she was waiting for me to fight back, to beg for closeness, to prove I cared. But I didn't give her that satisfaction. Instead, I said something that even surprised me. You're right. Then I walked out. The next morning, I didn't make coffee for both of us like I usually did. I didn't text her during the day to check in. I came home, ate alone, and went straight to the guest room. She didn't ask why. She thought I was sulking. She didn't realize I was adapting. I started to move differently. I stopped anticipating her moods, stopped rushing to fix what she broke with her indifference. When she forgot to buy groceries, I didn't drive to Walmart at midnight to restock. When her car needed gas, I didn't fill it for her. When she left her laundry in the dryer, I didn't fold it. At first, she didn't notice. She was too busy in her own world, too confident that I'd never stop showing up. But the small silences started stacking up. The house grew colder, the distance sharper. One night, she asked, "Are you okay?" I said, "I'm fine." My voice was steady, detached. That was the truth. I was fine. For the first time in a long time, I felt calm. She had drawn a line. I just stepped to the other side of it and stayed there. She thought denying affection would make her feel powerful. She didn't realize it would teach me how to stop giving mine. The next few days felt like watching a slow storm roll in. Quiet, heavy, inevitable. She walked around the house humming, pretending everything was normal. But it wasn't. Something had shifted. I no longer filled the space between her moods with effort. I no longer tried to fix what she broke with silence. I had stopped showing up. Every morning, she'd leave early for work, grabbing her Starbucks cup on the way out. Before, I used to pack her lunch, leave a note, or at least walk her to the door. Now I didn't move. I'd sip my own coffee, answer emails, and watch her reflection disappear in the window. The routine had flipped. For the first time, she was the one chasing attention and finding none. By the third day, she noticed. She came home late, expecting dinner to be ready, laundry folded, bills paid. Instead, the house looked like a mirror of her effort, untouched. She frowned, pacing the kitchen like she was searching for a reason. I said nothing. She asked if something was wrong. I told her nothing was wrong at all. "I'm just matching your energy," I said quietly. She didn't respond. That night, I slept like a man who had finally stopped explaining himself. The bed felt colder, but it was peaceful. She turned her back, but I didn't try to close the distance. She had claimed intimacy wasn't a duty. I decided neither was effort. At work, I poured myself into everything I'd neglected. I started going to the gym again, spent more time talking with coworkers, even grabbed dinner with Mark one night after hours. He asked how things were at home, and I said, "Balanced." He laughed, not realizing how accurate that word was. Balance was exactly what I'd found, the kind that comes when you stop overgiving to someone who stopped showing up for you. By the weekend, she tried to break the silence with small gestures. A text in the morning, a photo of her coffee with a "thinking of you" caption. I replied with a thumbs up once. That was all. Her control was slipping, and she could feel it. The energy had shifted completely. She wanted to be chased. Now she was the one waiting. And I wasn't angry. I wasn't playing games. I had simply stopped performing. When you stop showing up on demand, people finally see the real cost of taking you for granted. By the second week, the silence had started to eat at her. She tried to fill it with noise, music playing in every room, FaceTime calls with her friends, laughter that sounded just a little too forced. I watched it all quietly, from a distance that wasn't physical but emotional. She'd talk louder, hoping to pull me back into her orbit. I stayed calm, detached. She didn't know that once a man stops craving attention, he becomes impossible to manipulate. One Friday night, she came home from work, wearing the same perfume she used to wear when things between us were good. She walked into the kitchen, smiling like nothing had changed, and asked if I wanted to go out. I said no. I told her I already had plans. She looked confused, maybe even insulted. I didn't elaborate. That night, I met Jake and a few guys from work at an Applebee's. Nothing special, just wings, beer, and talk about life. But for me, it felt like a turning point. I wasn't escaping home to avoid her. I was simply enjoying peace that didn't require effort. When I got back, she was sitting on the couch in silence, scrolling her phone. The lights were off except for the glow of the TV. For the first time, she didn't ask where I'd been. The next morning, she woke up earlier than usual and made pancakes. I came downstairs, grabbed a coffee, and sat across from her. She tried to make conversation, asking about work, plans, anything. I gave short answers, polite but distant. It wasn't revenge. It was balance. Every word she once withheld, I was now matching with silence. Later that day, I noticed she'd started dressing differently, putting more effort into her appearance. New clothes, new perfume, new tone. She was trying to reverse something she couldn't name. What she didn't understand was that attraction doesn't return through effort. It returns through respect. And once that's gone, it doesn't come back on demand. That weekend, she invited a couple of friends over, hoping to reset the mood. They laughed loudly, drank wine, and asked where I was. She told them I was just distant lately. I heard one of them whisper, "He's probably over it." I smiled quietly from the other room. She wanted to live without pressure, without expectation. Now she was learning what it meant to live without presence. I hadn't left her physically, but emotionally, I was already gone. By the third week, I'd mastered silence. It wasn't passive, it was strategy. I no longer reached for her, no longer offered comfort, and most importantly, no longer explained myself. She noticed the difference in ways that startled her. The rhythm of the house had changed. My absence was everywhere. The mornings felt heavier, the nights colder. And for the first time, she was the one watching me move through the rooms, trying to read what I was thinking. One evening, she asked if I wanted to watch something together on Netflix. I said I'd already seen it. She asked if I wanted to go for dinner. I told her I'd eaten at work. Every answer was calm, non-confrontational, but it built a quiet wall she couldn't climb. She began overcompensating, buying groceries I liked, making my favorite meals, leaving notes again. But the difference was, I no longer needed any of it. She had mistaken my love for dependency. What she didn't realize was that my consistency came from choice, not weakness. And now that choice was gone. A few nights later, I went out alone. I didn't say where. I ended up at a Waffle House off the interstate, sitting in a corner booth with black coffee and a notebook. It was the same spot I used to take her after long drives, back when even silence between us felt safe. Now it was just me, the low hum of the ceiling fan, and the sound of my own breathing. I wrote down one line that night. If affection is conditional, so is effort. When I got home, she was sitting on the couch, wide awake, phone in her lap. I could tell she'd been crying. She didn't speak, just looked at me with the kind of fear that only comes when control slips away. I walked past her without saying a word. The look in her eyes said she finally understood the difference between attention and connection. The next morning, she tried to act normal again, cooking breakfast and humming softly, as if pretending could rewind time. But nothing felt normal anymore. I sat down, ate quietly, and left for work without kissing her goodbye. She wanted a man who didn't expect her love on demand. Now she was realizing what it meant to live without mine at all. A few days later, I stopped coming home right after work. I'd stay late at the office, finish projects I'd been putting off, then drive around town with no destination. Sometimes I'd park near a Target parking lot, watch the lights flicker across the windshield, and think about how quiet life had become. Not lonely, quiet. The kind of quiet that comes when you finally stop trying to convince someone to care. She started texting more often. The messages were simple at first. "What time will you be home? Are you okay?" Then they turned softer. "I miss you. I don't like this distance." I read every message and answered none. The silence was saying everything she'd ignored before. One Friday, she called. I let it ring out. When she tried again, I picked up. Her voice was smaller than I remembered. She asked if I was mad. I said I wasn't. Then she asked why I was acting different. I told her, I just stopped showing up for things that aren't mutual. There was a long pause before she said, "So this is punishment?" I said, "No, it's balance." And then I hung up. The next morning, she tried to fix it in the only way she knew how: control through kindness. She made breakfast, cleaned the house, even dressed up before I got out of the shower. She smiled and asked if I wanted to go somewhere together. I told her I already had plans. She didn't ask with who. She just nodded and walked away, her smile trembling at the edges. Later that night, I went out to a diner by the coast. I sat in a booth, watching couples talk over cheap coffee. They weren't perfect, but they were connected. I realized how much effort I'd been pouring into a woman who had stopped meeting me halfway a long time ago. And when that thought settled, I didn't feel sad. I felt free. When I came home, she was still awake, sitting on the couch in the dark. She didn't speak, and I didn't offer words. The air between us was heavy, filled with all the things she never thought she'd have to say. She wanted independence. Now she had it, and it terrified her. What she once called space now felt like abandonment. What she called freedom had turned into silence, and I had no intention of breaking it. By the next week, she had started unraveling. I could see it in the small things: how she'd hover near me when I made coffee, how she'd search for reasons to talk, how her voice carried that slight shake people get when they realize they've lost control. She had built her confidence on the assumption that I'd always chase. When I stopped, her foundation cracked. That Saturday morning, she came downstairs wearing one of the old sweatshirts I used to love on her. She made 2 mugs of coffee, set one in front of me, and tried to start a conversation. She asked if I remembered our first road trip to Nashville, how we got lost, and ended up eating breakfast at some random Waffle House at 2 a.m. I remembered every detail, but I didn't let it show. I just smiled politely and said, "Yeah, that was a while ago." The way her face fell told me everything. She could feel the distance and couldn't bridge it anymore. Later that day, she posted a photo of us from that same trip on Facebook. The caption read, "Love always finds a way." But there was no mention of me, just nostalgia and an audience of friends who didn't know the truth. I didn't like it. I didn't comment. I just let it sit there, a digital ghost of a relationship she'd already destroyed with her own words. That evening, she broke the silence completely. She said she didn't understand what I was doing. She said I was scaring her. I told her calmly, "You said intimacy isn't something to expect on demand. I finally understand that. So I stopped expecting anything." She stared at me, speechless, realizing I wasn't angry. I was done. There's a difference between a man who's mad and a man who's moved on. One wants change, the other has accepted truth. She went upstairs after that, slammed the bedroom door, and cried loud enough for me to hear. I didn't follow. I sat on the couch, sipping my coffee, watching the lights outside the window fade. My silence wasn't meant to punish, it was meant to mirror. She was finally feeling the weight of what she'd created. That night, I slept peacefully. No guilt, no noise, no pretending. She had wanted space. Now she had it in full. She thought control came from withholding affection, but real control came from my absence. A few days later, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet, and for the first time, it didn't feel like home. It felt like a memory I'd already outgrown. She was still asleep upstairs, the faint glow of her phone lighting up the nightstand, notifications from a life that no longer involved me. I brewed coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and watched the steam fade into the cold air. I thought about how something so warm could disappear so quickly when you stop tending to it. That's what love had become between us, an unattended flame. When she came downstairs, her eyes were red. She looked smaller, softer, as if the distance had started to weigh on her physically. She tried to sound normal, asking if I wanted breakfast. I said no, grabbed my keys, and left. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't breathe in that house anymore. I drove to the coast, parked near a quiet strip of beach, and sat inside my Ford F-150 watching the tide move in slow, heavy waves. I hadn't felt that still in months. No noise, no accusations, no expectations. Just air. That's when I realized I wasn't running from her. I was returning to myself. By evening, I went back. She was sitting on the couch, the TV on mute, staring at nothing. She didn't ask where I'd been. Instead, she said something that caught me off guard. She said she'd been reading old messages from me, from the early days, back when I'd tell her I loved her for no reason. She said she missed that version of us. I looked at her and said quietly, "You killed that version of us the moment love became a transaction." She flinched like the words hit her physically. I didn't mean them to hurt. I meant them to end the illusion. She whispered that she didn't mean what she said that night. But intentions don't erase consequences. After that, I didn't raise my voice or make a scene. I just went upstairs, packed a small bag, and told her I'd be gone for a while. She asked where I was going. I told her, somewhere I don't have to earn peace. Her tears came fast, but I didn't look back. I walked out, closed the door gently, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger or sadness. I felt free. The first night away felt strange, but not lonely. I checked into a small roadside motel near the bay, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzes louder than the traffic outside. The room smelled like salt and cheap detergent, but it was quiet, and quiet was all I needed. I set my phone on the nightstand face down. Her messages kept coming, each one shorter, more desperate. I didn't read them. I didn't have to. I knew what they said. Remorse always sounds the same when it's too late. The next morning, I walked to a diner across from a Target and sat by the window with black coffee and eggs that tasted like cardboard. The waitress asked if I wanted to order for two. I said no, just me. It was the first time I'd said that in years, and it hit harder than I expected. That simple sentence carried an entire truth. I wasn't responsible for anyone's comfort but my own anymore. Around noon, I finally turned my phone over. Dozens of missed calls. Her last message said, "If you're done, at least tell me." But she already knew I was. Silence says more than words ever could. Over the next few days, she called Jake, hoping he'd reach me. He texted, saying she was a mess, barely eating, barely sleeping. He asked if I could just talk to her once, not to fix things, but to give her closure. I told him, closure isn't something you get. It's something you give yourself when the other person stops explaining. He didn't reply. He didn't have to. I stayed at that motel for 3 days. Each morning, I felt lighter. I started running again, reading, sleeping like I hadn't in months. My mind was clearing, and for the first time, I could see everything with perfect clarity. She hadn't just stopped being affectionate. She'd stopped being kind. And when kindness dies, love follows. On the third night, I drove back to the house. Not to stay, but to gather a few things. The porch light was on. Through the window, I saw her sitting at the kitchen table, face in her hands. The same phone that once distracted her now lighting up with nothing. No new notifications. No audience. I didn't knock. I didn't go in. I just stood there long enough to know she understood the lesson. She thought my silence was punishment. It wasn't. It was peace. Hers to face, mine to keep. A week passed before she gathered the courage to come find me. I was sitting in a cafe near the marina, reading on my MacBook, when I saw her reflection in the glass. She looked exhausted, like someone who hadn't slept properly in days. She stood by the door for a moment, unsure whether to come in. Then she did. I didn't move. She sat across from me without asking, holding a cup of coffee she hadn't touched. For a long time, she said nothing. Then she whispered, "I didn't know it would get this bad." Her voice cracked halfway through the sentence. I didn't respond. She kept talking, trying to fill the silence, explaining how she thought I'd always be there, how she thought space meant safety. I let her speak until she ran out of words. Finally, I said, "You told me I couldn't expect affection on demand. You were right. So I stopped expecting it. And when I stopped expecting, I also stopped giving." Her eyes filled instantly, but I kept my tone calm, even. Love doesn't survive indifference. It dies quietly, like a house plant you forget to water, and by the time you notice, it's already gone. She reached out to touch my hand, but I didn't take hers. I wasn't angry. I just didn't belong to that version of my life anymore. She asked if we could start over, if maybe there was still something left to rebuild. I told her, "You can't rebuild what you kept breaking every time you were bored." The words hung between us, sharp but true. The waitress stopped by, refilled my coffee, and looked at her with a kind of quiet sympathy. I could tell even strangers could feel it, the imbalance, the finality. My wife lowered her eyes, realizing for the first time that I wasn't performing anymore. I wasn't trying to look strong. I was simply done. She said she'd changed, that she wanted to show me. I told her she didn't owe me proof. She owed herself understanding. Because love without respect isn't love, it's convenience. When I left, she didn't follow. She just sat there, staring at the empty chair across from her, the same way I'd done countless nights waiting for her attention. This time, the silence wasn't mine. It was hers, and it was louder than anything I could have said. 2 weeks passed before I heard from her again. This time, it wasn't a message or a call. It was a letter left under the door of the small apartment I'd rented. Inside was a folded piece of paper, her handwriting shaky but familiar. She wrote that she finally understood what I'd been trying to show her. That love isn't owed. It's nurtured, and once it's taken for granted, it doesn't vanish with anger, it fades with indifference. She said she wanted to see me one last time, not to ask for anything, but to speak honestly for once. I met her at a quiet park near the edge of town, where we used to walk our dog back when things were easy. The air was cool, the kind of early evening stillness that makes everything feel like a memory. She was already there, sitting on a bench, looking smaller than I remembered. No makeup, no performance, just a woman stripped of everything but truth. When I sat down, she didn't look at me right away. She said she hadn't realized how much she depended on being wanted until the wanting stopped. She said the silence had been louder than any argument we'd ever had. Her voice trembled when she admitted she used to think withholding affection gave her power. Now she knew it only created distance she couldn't cross back over. I listened without interrupting. There was no satisfaction in watching her break. It wasn't what I wanted. I just needed her to finally understand. When she asked if I could ever forgive her, I said, "Forgiveness isn't the problem. I just can't go back to being someone who begs for basic care." She nodded slowly, tears slipping down her face. Then she said something I'll never forget. "You didn't leave me because I stopped loving you. You left because I stopped respecting you." I looked at her then, really looked, and for a moment, I saw the woman I used to know. But only for a moment. I stood up, placed my coffee cup on the bench beside her, and said, "I didn't disappear. I just stopped showing up where I wasn't valued." She looked down, her hands shaking, but she didn't argue. She couldn't. As I walked away, I realized the ending wasn't tragic. It was necessary. Some stories don't end with hate. They end with clarity. And clarity, I learned, is the purest form of freedom. What would you have done in my place? If the story hit you, leave a like. And don't forget to subscribe. It only gets stronger from here.